Thanks for tuning in. This is Auraten, a podcast for South Asian women by South Asian women. Today's topic is domestic abuse and toxic masculinity. Mandeep Kaur, Sania Khan, Noor Mukaddam, Garima Kothari. Who are these women? These are all women who were victims of intimate partner violence, the hidden cancer of the South Asian community. About 60% of South Asian women report having experienced some form of domestic abuse in their lives. We here at Auraten believe the numbers to be closer to 75 to 90% due to the nature of the problem and the cloak of secrecy and shame attached to reporting these incidents. Mandeep Kaur, a 30-year-old woman, has left behind multiple videos detailing the abuse her husband, Ranjodhbeer Sandhu, subjected her to for 8 years. In the most distressing video of them all, he is beating her while you can hear her 4-year-old daughter crying, asking him to stop. She committed suicide 2 days ago in Richmond Hill, Queens. She leaves behind 2 daughters, 4 years old and 6 years old. Sania Khan was a 29-year-old Pakistani-American woman who married a man after dating him for 6 years. She left him less than a year later for trying to jump out of a 20-story building holding her. She filed for divorce and moved from Georgia to Chicago. She had wanted to go back to her family in Tennessee, but they told her they'd kill themselves if she came back. On July 18, 2022, her ex-husband Raheel Ahmed traveled from Georgia to Chicago and killed her with a single shot to the back of the head. She was documenting her divorce journey on TikTok. Noor Mukaddam was a 27-year-old Pakistani victim of murder who was kidnapped, tortured for 2 days, raped, and then decapitated with a knife. Her killer, Zahir Jaffer, confessed to the police that he had intended to kill her if she didn't accept his marriage proposal. Zahir Jaffer was sentenced to death, but is still appealing, and the family is still waiting for justice. Garima Kothari was a 35-year-old woman who was 5 months pregnant when she was found dead in her apartment with trauma to her upper body. Her death was ruled a homicide. Her husband, Manmohan Mal, was found dead in the Hudson River in Jersey City soon after. His death was ruled a suicide. There are no other details available. In an article in Inquiry's Journal, author Hamza Hussain asked the question, why are South Asian immigrant women vulnerable to domestic violence? In it, he discusses South Asian culture and how it places a strong value on collectivism, with an emphasis on a strong family unit. This discourages and often punishes individualism and expects the sacrifices necessary to make this work to come from its women. After all, women aren't supposed to be liberated anyway. But more interestingly, Hussain talks about an integral component to the South Asian diaspora, the model minority myth. He states South Asians in the United States are often believed to be a model minority, as they are commonly thought of as a successful, hardworking, family-oriented community in an attempt at upward group mobility. The model minority image is problematic as it not only deters public attention from internal issues like domestic violence, but also encourages members to conform to their expected gender roles and to maintain their public image. This includes internally motivating domestic violence victims to keep their violence hidden, a common trend in South Asian culture. In today's episode, Sami, Amna, and I will be discussing our experiences with domestic abuse and toxic masculinity, where we think the problem lies, and what we think the solutions are. Let's tune in.
Hello, Auraten.
Hello, Auraten.
Hello, Auraten.
What's the first thing that comes to mind when you think domestic violence? I always think of like a married couple, but it can actually be like, that's like intimate partner violence, I think, is the other term for it as well.
Yes.
And it's defined as
It doesn't have to be a husband, right?
Right. But it's defined as just violent or aggressive behavior within the home, typically involving the violent abuse of a spouse or partner, and that it comes from a belief system that tells the abusive person that they have the right to control their partner. And it's like justified in using whatever necessary to maintain that control. And in our South Asian community, that control is basically men are born with control in their hands. And so toxic masculinity just starts right there, right?
Right off the bat, like literally when they're born, they kind of told that they're the better sex, right?
Right. They're put on pedestals, right?
They're put on pedestals. They can literally do no wrong. And we're gonna go into this, I guess, later, the toxic masculinity part of it, which is actually a very big, I think, root cause of the bigger disease of domestic violence, right?
Right. And what is it what's going on there in our families and in our communities?
So when they say domestic violence, is it just husband and wife, intimate partner, or is it also children?
No, domestic violence can include children as well.
Okay, so then we need to talk about that too, because it actually starts there, right? Women are told that it's okay, this is love, because your father's controlling you, manipulating you, beating the shit out of you, right?
From the child's perspective, yeah.
Yeah, and from a female child perspective. The male child अलग है, female child के perspective से आपको दिखाया जा रही है, बताया जा रहा है, आपका अब्बा करता है ना, कहाँ जा रही हो, क्यों जा रही हो, ये कर रही हो, थप्पड़ खाओगी. This is love.
Right.
और फिर आपका भाई भी आपको मारता है, और
हाँ, भाई मारता है, control करता है, manipulate करता है चीजों को. Even if he doesn't hit you, he acts like, he's God and he has the right to tell you what the fuck to do.
Right. And our South Asian parents, I mean, I have to wonder, like, they're just doing the things that their parents did, that the same sort of ideas that were passed down to them, right? That, like, okay, men are the bread earners. They're the ones that are going to control everything that happens at home, while women kind of are just there for the care and the pleasure, right? Like, even just in the pandemic right now, the fact that, like, domestic violence went up considerably. The New York Organization for South Asian Women, it's an anti-domestic violence organization that works with the South Asian community in New York. Yep, Saki. Their calls fell by almost 2/3 when the pandemic hit. And then they were double pre-pandemic numbers a couple months later. And they were just inundated with calls for help and support. So even environmental factors like the pandemic can actually increase domestic violence and intimate partner violence.
Of course they can, because if a man is losing his job, if a man feels insecure about whatever, the first place.
And just the act of staying home, right?
Even in non-violent relationships, a lot of relationships shattered. Engagements broke. People got separated. So domestic violence, in violent relationships, domestic violence is going to increase.
So someone that works for the ACS was telling me that about 6 months into the pandemic, when everybody was in stay at home, she was getting almost triple the calls that she was getting prior to that. And ACS is child services. And so children were being pulled out of domestic violence situations. And she said the numbers were ridiculous and the situations were extreme, violent. And
because I mean, that kind of violence affects like every person living in that house, or like everyone that's probably exposed to it, including children, unfortunately. Of course, with the increase of technology, we're hearing more and more about these, and almost instantaneously as well, right? Like these news come up and suddenly everyone knows, which feels like it's a lot more than before. But I think it definitely I think every news makes me go, what the fuck? Like, not another woman, and not another Desi family behind this woman who didn't support her. Like, my brain never goes to, why was she there? What was she doing? Or, right, like being in these situations ourselves and having dealt with some form of male violence ourselves, I think our first thoughts, like my first thought is always, what kind of male privilege and power did that man have? And was that man given and allowed to have that went unchecked? And why? Why is it that, like, in our South Asian community, this is prevalent, right? We just, in doing some research for this episode, we learned that about 40 to 50% of South Asian women in America.
40 to 50% South Asian women in America are victims of domestic violence, yes. And those are numbers that are reported, right? Like how many go unreported?
Right.
Let's just take a small poll here. How many of us have suffered from domestic violence in some form or angle?
Yep. I'm raising my hand. Yeah.
Yep.
So there's 3 of us, and that means 100%. How many of us reported it?
0.
Yeah.
0.
Right.
Or even talk to our families about it, or generally in conversation talk to our friends about it.
There's so much shame attached to being the victim in an abuse situation, intimate partner abuse, domestic violence, child abuse, sex abuse. I mean, you name it, and everywhere. And somehow the blame falls on the woman of doing something wrong, right? What were you doing? Where were you? Why were you wearing that? What were you even doing with that person? So there's like so many questions that come up that the odds are pitted against us that we're going to come out and talk about it, right? And even when we're talking to each other, like even when women are talking to women, there's that shame and judge.
Or outright denial. They say, you're an anomaly. It doesn't happen in middle-class families. It doesn't happen in educated families. When there are studies in South Asia that say violence transcends class, education, in South Asia, numbers are up to 90%.
And it's phenomenal, right? It's the educated people that are denying the existence of this, right? Like as if denial makes domestic violence not be an issue in your country or of your people, or of your ethnicity, whatever it is that you're identifying with that's irritating you. But it's like, and denial makes the problems go away because that's worked really well.
Right.
Ever.
And you're accused of lying. I have been accused of lying, that I'm exaggerating.
And I think that's probably why women don't want to say anything, because they're afraid that they're going to get blamed for it. Because that's usually what happens, is that we get the shit, right? Like thrown back in our face. Like, tum kyun thi wahan pe? Tum kyun gayi? Right? Like we are the ones that are blamed at the end of the day. And the sort of, but I still like, mere dimag mein ye cheez, I'm unable to comprehend why we do not talk about these traditional stereotypes of the male, right? Like the man in the family as being like the dominant. And why is it that like we're continuing to socialize our like boys in that same system, like that patriarchal system, right?
Because we're not identifying it as wrong. Because मर्दों की शान अपनी मर्दानगी में होती है.
Right.
और वो मर्द ही क्या जो अपनी औरत को कंट्रोल नहीं कर सकता.
Right. And I'm like, how many women is it going to take for this shit to change? Aur kitni auratein marengi, right?
So it's the same mother who's bringing you up. I say mother because in our culture, it's mostly mother who's responsible for your training. So it's the same mother who's bringing up you to be the perfect girl, perfect woman, and be subservient and talk like this and walk like this and have skills that you're going to be excellent wife. And the same mother is training her sons to be oppressors. That just boggles my mind.
When was the first time that you remember your mother probably asking you, or telling you rather, कि अगर ये सारी चीजें नहीं सीखोगी तो अच्छी बीवी कैसे बनोगी? How old were you?
I don't know if she said achhi bivi, but what I remember is maybe I was 8.
Sam?
I was thinking around that same age too. Like I had started already, like the jokes about like, oh, tum to badai ho, or tum yahan, kisi aur ke ghar mein jaogi, or tumhara miyan jo kahega wo tum karogi, or like. So it had already started. So I think when you were saying that children are learning from their mothers, they're also learning from their fathers just by watching what their fathers are doing, right?
Absolutely. And the father is the one that's commenting, right? जब तुम बड़ी होगी तो तुम्हें क्या लगता है? कोई मर्द ये सहेगा? ये बातें आपने नहीं सुनी है?
Right.
मतलब मेरी जात का मकसद है कोई मर्द मेरी जात को सहे.
Absolutely.
Like what the fuck?
An 8-year-old girl who's out playing, jumping from trees is not told that you shouldn't be doing that. You could break your bones, or, is slapped because her clothes are torn and she's told that she will never be able to be a good wife. No man will tolerate this shit. 8-year-old. Can you imagine?
And then at the same time, we're socializing boys in an entirely different way, right? Like boys are like, oh, bahar jaake khelo, tumhe jo karna hai karo. You are going to be the next man of the house, right? Boys don't cry. Boys don't share emotions. Like all these things, I feel like get wrapped up into the adulthood of that man.
So let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about that. Toxic masculinity. What does it look like in our houses? Think about it. What do you think about when you think about toxic masculinity? How are you treated differently than the male in your house?
Yeah, like the opportunities and the freedom.
Privileges,
freedom, and the constant nagging. Yes, if they, boys, my playmates, if they did bad things, they were beaten up, but they were not told, you are going to ruin everybody's life, you will never be a good husband, whereas we were told that. Even for things like, I love to read books, I was told, okay, that's bad. And the message you constantly get, maybe less so in US for diaspora, but you got this message all the time in Pakistan, not from my immediate family, but from surrounding family, that you're making a mistake by letting your daughter get educated. You're making a mistake by letting her be a doctor. And most women hear that. The famous saying that they say is कि लड़कियों को पढ़ाना नहीं चाहिए, उनका दिमाग खराब हो जाता है.
हाँ, मेरे साथ ये नहीं हुआ था, लेकिन मेरे साथ ये definitely हुआ था, which to me is very interesting. It's that it's that underhanded misogyny, right? हम तुम्हें पढ़ा रहे हैं का मकसद ये है कि आप जता रहे हैं, क्यों जता रहे हैं? So then it's like, as I got older, I realized it was because you're so patriarchal. कि ये भी चीज आपको एक out of the ordinary लगती है.
I'm doing you a favor.
Yeah. Why aren't you thankful for this? Like,
why aren't you thankful for this?
हमने at least तुम्हारी पढ़ाई करा दी है. अब लेकिन तुम्हारा ulterior मकसद ये है कि तुम्हें शादी करनी है.
और
उसके बाद तुम वैसे भी तो उस पढ़ाई का कुछ करोगी नहीं.
Right.
तो वो तो पापा बोलने हैं.
Exactly. और उसके बाद जो तुम्हारा मर्द जो कहेगा, बस तुम्हें वो करना है. Right? Like, so those are the messages that we're growing up with when we're children and teenagers and young adults, which is obviously like fueling toxic masculinity, and even in our brown culture, right? Like ke beta ghar ka hai, beti bahar ki hai, beti kisi aur ki amanat hai, is type ki baatein. And placing the amount of power and privilege into the hands of the fathers and the sons of the family, always. The amount of control that they're given, right? To make the decisions.
The amount of control that they're given, yes.
That they're deciding what's right and what's wrong for us, or where can we go and what can we wear, and, all the things.
Or go out to play. Boys, my daughter made an observation once we were in Lahore, and we went out in the evening, and she said, where are the girls? There were too many teenage boys outside, and she was like, wow, so many people. I said it was hot, so they're out. And she was like, girls were home all day too. It was hot. Where are they?
Right.
And that's like something we don't even think about. I grew up there and never thought about it until my 10-year-old brought it up.
Yeah. And she's bringing up a really good point of like where is it that we don't see women and girls, right? And why is it that we don't see them there?
Yeah.
It's like these spaces occupied by men in our families, in our communities, all those decision-making, right, positions. And just even the fact that we, when we think about like, what does manliness even look like in our South Asian culture? It's like, oh, there's always this, even in Bollywood and stuff, you see this very aggressive sort of behavior. Mard hai ye, mard ka bacha hai, mard ka bacha ban, right? All these references that you keep hearing to like the strength and the virility of a man.
Yeah, and he's a provider. So toxic masculinity, my experience with toxic masculinity was that the first thing you learned as a child, that when your father came home, you disappeared.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you never knew what you did. I mean, you never said anything, but you never knew what you would do that would affect him, and he would lose it, and his losing it would be accepted because he's providing for us.
Right.
I used to feel like growing up the entire day, the beginning half of the day was about the kids, and the second half of the day was about the father coming home. And it was all about meal prep and kitchen prep. And like half an hour before the father was due home was the time where everybody would gather around in the kitchen, standing there, ready to serve.
Right. Like it's like the subjugation of women, right? Constantly in our families. Like, औरतों को बस सब कुछ करना है उस मर्द के लिए, right? खाना भी अगर सब वो पहले खाएगा, वो मैं बाद में खाऊंगी. Like there's a lot of families that still practice that.
Yeah.
And the fact that we willingly give authority to men, right? Over and over again. And I think that silence from the family is what kills me. Like even in these cases, like Sania Khan was speaking out against the fact that her family never supported her and never supported her through the divorce. And maybe if they, I don't know, I hate to think that, but maybe if they did support her, I don't know, would she have been alive today?
Yeah, we will never know.
Right.
We'll never know.
But at least she
We'll
wouldn't
never
have been
know.
alone, right? That she
At
would
least
have
She
had,
wouldn't be alone.
right.
Yeah.
And there are studies done about that too. Women who are subjected to violence, and when they have support, they can get out of that and thrive.
और ये भी मुझे कहना है कि even when हमारी culture में एक बहुत amazing चीज है कि even when there is support, it is so begrudgingly done that you wish that you didn't fucking have the support. Let me just tell you.
Yeah. Yes.
इतना मुसल्लत किया जाता है आपके सर पे.
And the same concept of honor. And I always felt like no matter what I did, I dishonored my family. And that, I think most of us feel that. And I feel like, why is entire honor sitting on my head? Why am I holding honor of my family? What about other members?
Right.
No matter what they do, they don't bring dishonor to me or my family, but no matter what I do, I bring dishonor to them.
Right. Because like honor just gets attached to us. As soon as we're born, हमारा नाम honor हो जाता है. Right?
हमारा नाम literally genitals है.
Exactly. मतलब एक लड़की पैदा हुई है, and that literally defines her moment of she can just throw her rights and her freedoms and her choices, everything out the door at that point.
क्योंकि लड़की कभी पैदा ही नहीं हुई थी ना, एक वजाइना पैदा हुई थी.
Right. Exactly. बस वो एक, that's it. The vulva was the only thing that was,
That's it. और since उस vulva की न कोई जात है, न कोई अपनी पहचान है,
right.
ना उसके कोई हक और हुकूक है. तो
right.
बस यही
बस
है.
एक vulva और फिर दो हाथ जिसके खाने बना दें, मर्दों के लिए. बस that's it. That's all they needed.
नहीं, और एक oven भी है. भाई एक oven भी है जिससे बच्चे उसने पैदा करने हैं, नहीं तो वो किसी काम की नहीं है. सही है ना?
Yeah.
So,
and it's, the fact that women go through such shame cycles in our families, that's the most hurtful thing, is that even I think if families can at least begin with believing the women and believing the words that they speak when they say that this guy is hitting me or that this is a very serious situation, the fact that we don't even take it seriously, right?
Yeah, they say मारता है और औरतों के पास तो नहीं जाता.
It's excused in every which way, right? And it's sort of accepted कि अच्छा हाँ मर्द एक हाथ लगा दे, कोई बात नहीं है, कोई गल नहीं, होता है ये तो, छोटी बातें होती हैं. And it's like, no, but this is not a छोटी बात, right? ये छोटी बात से ही बड़ी बात बन जाती है. You gotta nip it in the butt right then and there.
कहाँ line होती है हमें क्या पता होता है?
Right, because no one talks about it.
आपको कब पता होता है कि कब उसका दिमाग खटक गया, सटक गया और उसने वो हाथ से चाकू बन गया? How do you know?
Right.
आपको आपकी माँ ने और आपके बाप ने empower नहीं किया ना. Like it takes you a very long time to say, listen, what's happening is not right. I'm sorry, I can't deal with this anymore. And when you make a decision to say, I'm not going to deal with this anymore, then you are subjected to society's scrutiny and society's lantan, and that's what happened.
I think they raised us the way that they wanted to raise us. They wanted us to be submissive. They wanted us to be confused. They wanted us to be perplexed and to be easy to control and manipulate. They wanted कि वो खुद करेंगे तभी तो कोई और आके कर सकेगा ना. जब आपको प्यार पता ही नहीं है कि क्या होता है, तो आप मार और ये वो कोई समझते हैं कि हाँ ये प्यार है, मैनिपुलेशन, तुम ये करो, तुम वो करो, तुम ये कर सकती हो और ये नहीं कर सकती, तो फिर आगे जाके भी आपके लिए आसान होगा.
How often, even in our South Asian culture, it's accepted that, छोटी लड़कियों की शादी करा दी बड़े उम्र के मर्दों से, right? Like with anywhere from like 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 to 50-year difference between the girl and the man, in hopes that he could control her, right? Because she's like at a very vulnerable age. And it's easier for parents to just give their daughters over and be like, okay, yeah, I'm done. Now you can have her and do as you please.
तुम तो ये बातें कर रही हो कि इंडिया पाकिस्तान में जो गांव में जो लोग शादी कराते हैं 50-40 साल के फर्क में, लेकिन यहाँ पे भी अक्सर मर्दों को ये कहा जाता है कि नहीं, छोटी लड़की से शादी करना, एटलीस्ट 5 साल छोटी होनी चाहिए तुमसे.
Yeah, because then you can mold her. I mean, I've actually heard this even amongst our own, like, family friends and things like that. Like, oh, umar kam hai na ladki ki, acha hai wo usko mold kar dega. He'll teach her. And it's like, what the fuck is he going to teach her, right? Wo bichari bachchi ki, why are you ruining her life in this sort of relationship?
और वो मर्द जो होते हैं, जो समझो आजकल के जमाने के जो मर्द हैं, कभी आपने ये भी कॉन्वर्सेशन सुनी है कि आजकल के जमाने जो यंगर मेन हैं जो अपनी बीवियों के साथ एक इक्वालिटी का रिलेशनशिप रखते हैं, अगर वो खाना बना रही होती है तो वो बर्तन साफ कर रहा होता है. आपने कभी ये सुना है कि ओ देखो वो हेनपेक्ट है?
Yeah. Oh, I hear it all the time.
वो देखो वो हैंडपैक्ट है, वो तो उसके चुनरी के पीछे
का नौकर, जोरू का गुलाम.
Yeah. Oh, ये तो उसके नीचे लगा हुआ है.
हाँ, उसके नीचे लगा हुआ है, घाघरे के नीचे.
Horrible shit, right? Like, instead of going, you know what? Maybe they do need to share the responsibilities because it's not a woman's job to wash the dishes or cook the food, right? Like, the fact that we've ascribed gender to roles within the house, that is also part of the problem that we need to address and acknowledge, right? In our own families. And what we need to do actually, like, to change this for like more women beyond us, to really address and acknowledge how these things creep up in our own families, and not to like raise our daughters that same way that our mothers raised us, with that submission and, कि अच्छा नहीं चुपचाप बैठी रहना, तुम्हारा मर्द कुछ कहे तो कुछ मत बोलना. Like, you literally have taken the voice and the choice away from women over and over again. And we need to bring that back.
The way that you make this better for everybody is, number one, to acknowledge the fact that it's a problem.
Yeah.
That's number one.
Believing
to
those
acknowledge
women.
the fact that this happens, it exists in our society, and exactly how prevalent it is. It's not कि a one-off चीज है कि नहीं low class में होता है, upper class में नहीं होता, middle class में नहीं होता, पता नहीं ये क्या बकवासें होती हैं.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, मुझे तो लगता है कि it actually happens most in middle class and throughout, but a lot more in upper class and middle class families. मुझे तो ऐसा लगता है.
Yeah, 90%. 90% in Pakistan. HRCP has these numbers. 90%, and they are
90% of what though? Like,
of women in Pakistan are subjected to domestic violence. At one point in their life or throughout their lives. And it's in every class,
So we have to definitely stop and accept the fact that this is an actual problem in our community. We have to accept the burden of toxic masculinity. Women have to start standing up for themselves. Men have to start acknowledging their trauma, their own trauma, whatever it is, in order to work through it so that they're not walking around with the chip on their shoulder and the burden on the wife's head, right? On all the women, the girl child, the sister, the mother, the wife, they all carry the burden of that toxic man.
Right. And those things that really get exacerbated, especially when there's like social barriers, right? Like poverty, mental health challenges, homelessness. These things are going to probably increase the chances of domestic violence and sexual abuse within
Financial
relationships.
dependence.
Right. Right. And we really, I mean, Geeth, you're absolutely right that we need to start addressing this, because I think without addressing it in our own families and without our own families believing the women when they say it's happening, without going, I think one of those things that pisses me off in our families, you'll maybe have heard this too, where when you say something like, oh, you know, ye chal raha hai, there's some sort of abuse going on, you'll hear stupid shit like, oh, hame kya isse? Sanu ki, right? And you're like, what the fuck is that supposed to mean? Like, how are you not gonna try to step in and help, right? Or help support that person that is actually going through this?
Or they say, let's not talk about it. Let's respect her privacy.
Right. Oh, unka kamre ka मामला hai. We shouldn't get into the middle of it.
नहीं, और अगर एक और भी साइड है हमारी सोसाइटी का, जब हमारे करीबी देखो, it's very difficult, right? वहां देख के कहना कि ओ वो जो हो रहा है ना वो बहुत आसान होता है, जब आपके घर में खुद हो रहा है ना तो आप ब्लाइंड आई टर्न कर लेते हैं कि नहीं नहीं देखो मर्द है तो मर्द का गुस्सा है ना तो अब क्या करें, मतलब stop giving your bobbies these advice. Stand up for the damn bobby, even if it's your own brother who's being ridiculously aggressive. Just stop it and acknowledge the fact that this is not the way, this is not correct behavior. आपके साथ हुआ तो इसका मतलब है कि आपकी बेटी के साथ भी होना चाहिए, आपकी भाभी के साथ भी होना चाहिए और उसकी बेटी के साथ भी होना चाहिए, मतलब खत्म कब होता है ये.
Stand up for your mother-in-law, stand up for your mother, stand up for
all those female relationships in your family.
Women, girls, children who are being subjected to this, stand up for them. And my solution for that always has been to talk more about it. People say, why do you talk about it? Why do you talk about what happened to you or what happened to so-and-so? What does it matter to you? It does matter, because that's where the sadness is coming from. That seriously, 30 years later, the same thing is happening. It's just unacceptable to me. And really the solution is talk more about it, be out there. One of the reasons why we started this podcast is this, to have a community for people. Somebody will listen to one of this and say, yes, it happens to me too. And maybe they'll reach out to us. Maybe and that's why we give resources. Maybe they'll reach out to someone else.
मेरी एक कॉन्वर्सेशन हुई थी रिसेंटली, तो कोई मुझसे कह रहा था कि इसका मकसद क्या है पॉडकास्ट का. कोई कह रहा था मुझे कि ये सारी चीजें जो आप लोग कर रहे हो, इसका मकसद क्या होता है, मतलब हम बस ये शेयर करते हैं. ये सोचने का तरीका इतना छोटा कैसे हो सकता है, मतलब जब हम अपनी
वो मर्द होगा
जब तक हम अपने इश्यूज को डिस्कस नहीं करते, जब चेंज एक बंदे के अंदर आई ना, अपने अंदर आप एक चेंज ले आए, तो आपने सडनली अपनी पूरी इर्द गिर्द जो लोग हैं उनके साथ आपने अपनी बर्ताव चेंज कर लिए. जब ये हर घर में ऐसा एक बंदा होगा, तभी तो सोसाइटी में चेंज आएगी.
Right.
Absolutely.
And that change can start at that smallest of level, right? Like right within your own home, you can make that change, and we can all approach it in different ways. I think that's the other thing we sometimes get hung up on is like, how is this going to change?
How is this going to change anything? You and me talking about it, right?
Right. And it can't be one thing. Sure, we are one voice in this conversation, but it obviously is not going to change from this either, right? But we all can do our parts. And if there's a domestic violence shelter in your community, go look that up. Maybe volunteer there, maybe support them through donations. Have those numbers available that you can share with other women in your own community.
ऐसी ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस को हमेशा आपको सिर्फ पैसे की डोनेशंस नहीं चाहिए थे, अक्सर इनको इन काइंड डोनेशंस भी चाहिए होती हैं, which are sometimes clothes, sometimes sanitary napkins, sometimes baby formula, sometimes they need towels, basic stuff, socks, underwears. So it's not always that they need money and stuff. Sometimes they just need your time. They need you to, the organization needs you to help transport somebody back and forth from somewhere.
Right. And if you are looking for, and if you know somebody that's going through the situation and they're experiencing homelessness, like they've left their house, they don't know where else to go, find a shelter. There are domestic violence shelters here in the US. We named one, which was Saki in New York, which is specifically for South Asian women within the New York area. But there's plenty more now.
There is Apna Ghar in Chicago.
And Manvi in New Jersey. Well, we'll share an extensive list by state on our blog.
But these community resources are exactly what we need to be able to share more often. And I think I would encourage each of us to go have conversations about domestic violence with somebody in our family as well. And just have an open conversation for once about what's going on. And if that's happening in your own family, address it. Take that step to address it.
Hell yes, address it and call the person out. Call the person. We are full adults. Why are we living in fear? That's the other part. Right. What is this fear that we have? मतलब आप अब adult हो गए हैं, आप पलट के अगर आप अपने भाई बाप whatever जिसको भी husband हाँ जिसको भी confront करेंगे आप और आप कहेंगे ये आप नहीं कर सकते मेरे साथ, ये आप अपनी भाभी के साथ नहीं कर सकते, आप मेरी माँ के साथ नहीं कर सकते, मतलब just call it out.
Yeah, and also those of us who have children, and we talk about that in various groups, is that we need to raise our children with that. Not only girls, but those of us who have boys, they talk about that they're raising their boys with awareness and respect. Learn to respect women and girls. So that's the most important thing.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's better to have a divorced woman than a dead woman in your family, right? That she can at least have access to that. And I think that's where we need to make sure that women ensure that access to those resources. But we really can empower our own family members to sort of, understand what it means to victim blame, understand what it means to support women that are going through those abusive relationships.
मतलब ये सब अंडरस्टैंडिंग और ये सब करने की वैसे है सैमी, जब तुमने पहले भी बोला था, अब मैं उसको रिएटरेट कर रही हूँ, just believe them.
Yeah, exactly.
बाकी सारी चीजों की अंडरस्टैंडिंग खुद से ही आ जाएगी. If you believe, if you're not letting your mind get in the way, and if you're not letting your own hopes and desires for this person getting in the way, and you're just gonna let them say what they're saying, believe them for what they're saying. All right, ladies. This has been a great conversation.
Yeah.
I hope it helps. I hope someone listens and feels like we're talking to them.
And that we are here.
Reach out to us.
Reach out to us.
We all have to be
3 people.
We all have to be supportive, Auraten. So.
Absolutely. Women supporting.
And be connected, Auraten, so that we can be that, get that mutual support.
Yeah.
And know that there's a whole tiger club sitting here. Sherniyon ka club baitha hai. Sherni auraten.
Sherni auraten.
कोई अगर
survivor auraten.
कोई अगर आपको कुछ कर रहा है, आपको harass कर रहा है, आपको abuse कर रहा है, या कोई आपके questions हैं या आपको help चाहिए, reach out to us via Instagram or our website, and we'll figure out a way. Even if we're not in your state, even if we're not close, we'll figure out a way. We have a large network.
We do.
Yeah, we can tap into. But definitely visit auraten.com, AURATEN.com. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook. We're on TikTok. We're on YouTube. We're all over the place. So wherever you want to listen to us, go for it. And we hope we can continue.
Send us your questions.
Yeah,
concerns, questions, feedback.
Yeah, we want to continue these conversations. And if you have something you want to say, get in touch.
A story to share, even if you're worried, we can share it anonymously.
Yep.
Just get in touch.
Bol Auraten.
Bol Auraten.
Bol Auraten.